Sitting here? Oh, no, I'm sitting here. Okay. All right. That's amazing.
And then the other one is
The fight for a better world. Make everything.
yeah. Was the billionaires.
Yeah.
Maybe she wrote the other.
Teacher just told me that I was that.
Oh, that's
We went to
Good evening, everyone.
Thank you.
My name is John, and I'm the event coordinator here at McQuaig Robinson Booksellers. Before we begin, I would like, of course, to acknowledge that we are here in Treaty 1 territory, and the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Inuit, and the Chippewa, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Red River Métis. In addition, of course, McQuaig Robinson Booksellers itself rests on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Roostertown. We're so delighted you could be here tonight on a day that started off like winter and has now turned into a relatively balmy spring day. It's such a pleasure to welcome Linda McQuaig and Neil Brooks here to Winnipeg to discuss their new collaborative book, Canceling Billionaires Before They Cancel Us, The Urgent Case for a Wealth Tax. Huge thanks to both the book's publisher, Dundurn Press, and our good friends at the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives Manitoba branch for helping to make this evening a possibility. It's a real privilege to be here. In just a moment, Molly McCracken, the CCPA, will be out to introduce our speakers. Following that, you'll hear from both Linda and Neil before we move along to the question period. During that time, and please do let your questions percolate throughout the evening, I'll approach you in hopefully a non-threatening way with this microphone to ensure that your question is audible to all those in attendance and watching online. I'll be back at the end to review signing procedure. But for now, please give a very warm welcome to the Director of the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives Manitoba, Molly McCracken.
Thank you so much, John, and good evening, everyone. It's great to see you all here at McQuaig Robinson Bookseller, a place that has long been home for big ideas and important conversations. And tonight's event is about grappling with one of the defining issues of our time, rising inequality and the growing concentration of wealth and power. The Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, where I work, is Canada's leading progressive research institute, and we do research on income inequality, tax fairness, and public policy. And nationally, we've been tracking the growing gap between the very richest Canadians and everyone else, including the annual analysis of CEO pay, wealth concentration, and the costs and consequences of tax cuts. And here in Manitoba, we also do this locally alongside community groups proposing progressive alternatives. And so we're really excited to be here tonight about tonight's conversation, which is about canceling billionaires. We're very fortunate to be joined by two of Canada's most influential progressive voices on these issues, on how the immense power and wealth concentration amongst a small elite is unfair, undermines democracy, and threatens our planet's habitability. Linda McQuaig is an award-winning investigative journalist, a longtime columnist with the Toronto Star, and the author of 8 national best-selling books. For decades, her work has helped Canadians understand how economic power operates and what can be done to challenge it. Neil Brooks is one of the country's leading tax scholars and a former director of the graduate program on taxation at Osgoode Law School in Toronto. His work has shaped both academic thinking and public debate on how tax systems can and should serve the public interest. And so their work is, of course, essential reading for anyone concerned about what we do about the rise of the billionaire class in Canada. Please join me in welcoming Linda McQuaig and Neil Brooks.
Thank you so much, Molly, and it's wonderful to be back in Winnipeg and to be in this absolutely gorgeous bookstore. And thank you, Molly, for those kind words. If I could add just one biographical detail. I ran for politics against Chrystia Freeland. And as my daughter always likes to point out, I lost. But you know, people used to say that Freeland and I were kind of similar because we both wrote books about the super rich. But actually those books were very different. Freeland basically argued that the super rich are doing a great job running the world, whereas my book was, you know, kind of more in the spirit of the protesters who marched down Wall Street right after the 2008 financial crash, waving placards that said, "Jump, you fuckers." My book was more in the jump you fuckers genre of books about the super rich. But anyway, I want to talk today about our new book, Canceling Billionaires Before They Cancel Us. And partly I want to talk about what an important moment this is in a way. I actually believe that there's a bigger prospect for progressive change now than there's ever been in my lifetime, which is kind of surprising. And I'll explain that. You know, for decades, of course, we've had what we sometimes call the neoliberal or business agenda. And we all know what that is: tax cuts for the rich, you know, social spending cuts, privatization, weaker labor laws, all that sort of thing. And we were told, of course, that this would create great wealth and that wealth would then trickle down. And it's true, it did create great wealth, but almost none of it trickled down. And so after 4 decades of that, we're in a situation now where the rich are actually richer than they've ever been in history. And the gap between the rich and the poor is the biggest it's ever been. And that is true both in Canada and in the United States. And we argue in the book that this is really one of the most significant, in fact, it is the most significant social change of our lifetimes. And yet it's largely hidden. You know, the media barely talks about it. Sure, they talk about billionaires and how flashy their cars are and their homes and everything. And they talk about the poor a little bit, but they rarely kind of make the connection between the relationship. The truth is, the rich-poor gap is, as I say, bigger than it's ever been, and the impact that has on the lives of Canadians is simply enormous. And that's because the flip side of all that wealth going to the top, the flip side is that people beneath, ordinary people, are left really struggling. I mean, we hear so much about the affordability crisis, but all that means is ordinary people don't have enough money. They don't have enough money to get by. And of course, the right wants us to, you know, blame immigrants, but it's not immigrants. Immigrants have made off with that money. It's the super rich. It's the billionaires. And that's also meant the impoverishment of our wonderful social programs, our healthcare and our education, etc. Because billionaires don't care about those programs. They want to privatize them. They see them as money-making opportunities. While for the rest of us, they're essential to our well-being. And our social programs are clearly badly underfunded these days, and we need to rebuild them. But where can we possibly find the money? I mean, everybody's paying lots of tax, right? Actually, wrong. No, it's not true that everybody's paying lots of tax. It's true that most Canadians, almost all Canadians, pay a big chunk of their incomes in tax. But there's a small number of extremely wealthy Canadians who pay almost no tax. And that's because the income tax system taxes us on the basis of our income. So the wealthy can avoid it. They structure their situation so they simply don't receive income. They get all the money they want by borrowing, using their wealth as collateral. And that way they pay almost no income tax. And that's why we need a wealth tax in this country, because otherwise the ultra rich go tax-free. So it's not even that the wealth tax is a punishment or anything like that. It's just a way to ensure that everybody contributes. And when you think about it, it's not even a particularly radical idea. I mean, what's radical is the system we have now that exempts the rich, essentially. So here's the proposal. We argue that Canada should have a wealth tax, and it would be aimed exclusively at the super rich. And what do I mean by that? What do we mean by that? We mean anyone with a fortune of more than $25 million. Okay, now that is a lot of money. Like, for instance, hands up here, all those who have a fortune of $25 million. Come on, don't be shy. Okay, about half of you, I guess. It's clearly a very tiny group. In fact, this wealth tax we're talking about would only hit the top 0.1%. That's not the top 1%, that's the top 1/10 of the top 1%. And they'd only have to pay a wealth tax of 1% a year, and only on amounts above 25 million. So let's say somebody had a fortune of 25 million, total fortune 25 million plus $100. The 25 million is exempted at the bottom. They'd only pay the 1% wealth tax on the $100. In other words, $1 a year. Okay, but the tax, would apply to all the wealth above that, and it gradually rises to a top rate of 8% on billionaires. But you can see this is a very modest tax we're talking about, okay? But here's the thing. There is so much wealth at the top today that even this very, very modest wealth tax would raise $40 billion a year in Canada. That is just a game changer, $40 billion a year. It would pay for so many things in terms of strengthening our social programs, public transit, renewable energy transition. We could, for instance, take 10 billion out of the 40 billion and make all college and university free for every student across the country. That would be absolutely transformative in allowing the poor kids to lift themselves out of poverty. It would transform this country, making it much more egalitarian, much fairer. Now, if that sounds too good to be true, That's because we're brainwashed to believe it's too good to be true. We're told we can't tax the rich, right? You've heard that occasionally. We can't tax them because what? They'll leave and they'll take their wealth with them. This is the threat that they constantly make and is constantly made for them. And it sounds worrisome. But hold on, not so fast. Yes, it's true, the rich can leave, but they'll face a hefty exit tax when they go. All their unrealized capital gains are subject to tax when they exit, making their departure really very expensive for them. So the point is, they're not going to leave because they don't want to pay a huge exit tax. In other words, their threats are largely hollow, their threats of leaving. Now, this is very important because it tells us that collectively, we're much more powerful than we realize. We can impose a wealth tax, and the rich will have to pay it just like we have to pay income taxes. We don't have any choice. They'll have to pay wealth taxes. Collectively, we have lots of power, but we have to begin wielding it. And I would just say that, you know, it's hard to imagine maybe we could ever wield that kind of power. The rich are more powerful than ever, right? But that is precisely why I would argue change is possible, indeed likely, because Trump and the whole billionaire class out there have so overplayed their hands that a huge backlash is coming. Indeed, it's already arrived to some extent. You know, when you see it in the election of New York City Mayor Mandami, he got elected on a platform of taxing the rich, and everybody said it could never happen, and there he is as mayor. In California now, the healthcare workers union have collected hundreds of thousands of signatures to get a wealth tax on the ballot next November. In fact, throughout the US, polls show that a strong majority of 67% of Americans favor a wealth tax. It's almost certainly going to be an item on the Democratic agenda for the next presidential race, which is only 2 years from now. Similarly, by the way, in Canada, polls show almost 90% support for a wealth tax. And if the issue gains momentum south of the border, you can be sure the pressure will build here. So I want to pass this over to Neil, but I just want to sort of summarize that, in fact, you know, obviously, I'm sure you're all involved in various progressive causes, and they're all important, and we should be fighting on so many different fronts for the environment, labor, democracy, all kinds of things. But I would argue that the wealth tax as an issue, as a campaign, is uniquely important. First of all, because it will raise that 40 billion, you know, that's fantastic. And it will reduce the power of the ultra wealthy. When you look at almost all the problems, the environment, labor, democratic, you know, almost behind every problem, there's a billionaire pushing some self-serving agenda. And the wealth tax would reduce their wealth and thereby reduce their power. The wealth tax goes to the very root of the problem we have today. And it's politically feasible. It's in fact downright popular before the campaign has even begun. So what it needs is some boots on the ground and some organizing. Neil?
Okay. This is where I hand out signs, make the rich pay, and we all go marching through. Anyway, it's a great pleasure again to be back in Winnipeg, as Linda mentioned. She is one of Canada's most outstanding public intellectuals. And I'm just a tax lawyer, among other things, and terribly boring. But it embarrasses me to tell people I'm a tax lawyer. Who would want to admit to being a tax lawyer? But I'm always very quick to point out, I actually don't practice tax, helping the rich pay less, I only teach it. But it does occur to me, maybe that's not any better, because surely many of the students who take my tax courses will go out and help the rich pay even less tax. And so that's always caused me a great deal of consternation. And once I was lamenting that to my class, and someone put their hand up and said, well, if it's any consolation to you, you're not doing a very good job of it. So I felt a whole lot better about myself. Anyway, Linda talked about the wealth tax, and that's largely what the book is about. But we have some chapters in the book where we deal with just related matters. One of them is what we call the philanthropy scam. We have 2 chapters on the philanthropy scam, which might seem like a digression, but in fact, it's an important part of the story about the role of billionaires in our society. And in those chapters, we argue that we should repeal all of the tax benefits that wealthy people get for pursuing their philanthropic activities. Billionaires love to portray themselves as philanthropists. Philanthropists. The press dutifully reports their donations to various charitable organizations. Those donations are taken to be as evidence of their beneficence and their concern for the betterment of society. But in fact, philanthropy as practiced by billionaires is a scam. First reason it's a scam is that the donations that billionaires give to charities really aren't gifts. I mean, you're only supposed to get a deduction for a charitable gift. But the amounts they give to charities are not really gifts. They are the price that billionaires willingly pay for the public relations benefit of being associated with philanthropy. And it provides enormous benefits for them. I mean, it buys them recognition for themselves. It results in them being obsequiously feted by community leaders and politicians at gala events. It gets their names plastered all over our universities, hospital, and other public buildings, establishing an invaluable legacy not only for themselves, but for their families. Indeed, driving into Winnipeg this morning, I noticed the names of three actually, of Manitoban billionaires on the University of Winnipeg. The University of Winnipeg buildings smashed up there as I'm driving along. There are their names in huge, great big letters. It whitewashes the often socially harmful way that their wealth was accumulated. It draws attention away from the tax and legal system, which are rigged in their favor. And it enhances their public influence and image and amplifies their political voice. An enormous consideration they get for the kind of charitable gifts that they give. The second reason philanthropy by billionaires is a scam is even though they get full credit for all of their donation, only a small percentage of the money that billionaires give to charitable causes is their own money. A large percent of it is other people's money. And that's because when they make a donation to a charity, they will invariably claim the charitable tax credit. And if they claim the charitable tax credit, when they claim the charitable tax credit, it'll qualify them for a tax refund equal to about 50% of their donation. So that in effect, they give $1 million, but only half of it is their own money. Half of it is the government's money. And when they file their tax return and claim the charitable tax credit, the government reimburses them, in this case, for giving the $500,000 on the government's behalf. So, and of course, so essentially they're giving away government's money. And of course, as offensive it is to not require the rich to pay their fair tax, it's equally offensive, we argue, that to allow them to direct where government money is going to be spent. And that's precisely what the charitable tax credit does. It allows high-income individuals to direct the spending of hundreds of millions of dollars of government money in a way over which the government nor anyone else has any control, for which there's no public accountability at all, for which there's no transparency, and which allows them to buy public monuments and recognition for themselves and give essentially legitimacy to their social indifference. Just to illustrate with a Manitoban example, Back in 2006, Ernest Rady, I hope I'm pronouncing his name.
Rady.
Rady, Ernst Rady, made a $30 million gift to the Faculty of Medicine at the University of Manitoba. And in return, the faculty was named after his father. So the faculty is now named the Max Rady,
Yeah.
As in Raider, as in Raider.
I know income tax section numbers, I don't know names. So anyway, the faculty is now named after his father. This gets a little tricky because Ernst was actually an American citizen at this time, but they always set them up. So they claim either against income that they have as stores in Canada, or he'll claim it against his US income tax return. So the principles are the same. But of the 30 million he gave to the college, up to 20 million of that would be government money. It wouldn't be his own money because he would have claimed the charitable tax deduction in the United States if that's where he claimed it, or the credit in Canada if he offset against Canadian source income. So he'll get a refund for half of his donation, but further, instead of cash, this is an outrageous provision in our Income Tax Act that we really rail against in the book. He would have likely donated corporate shares instead of donating cash to the University of Manitoba. If so, he'd be able to claim a tax deduction or get the credit in Canada for the full fair market value of those shares. But at the same time, if there were large accrued untaxed gains on those shares, which there would likely be, it's exempt if he gives the shares to a charity. So that provides him with another 20 to 25% tax saving on his donation. And so in effect, 10 million would be his own money, 20 million of it would be government money for the support of the medical college. So for that 10 million of his own money, the college carries his father's name in perpetuity. Think how silly that is. He gave $10 million, for Christ's sakes. That doesn't even cover the operating costs for 1 year. The Canadian taxpayers and students have been supporting that medical college with billions of dollars since 1883. I looked it up. That's called research. No, I do. So, and we'll continue off into the future for Christ. We'll keep paying for it. So for 10 million, it's in his names. It seems to me for naming universities after supporters, the University of Manitoba Medical College should be called the Canadian Taxpayers College of Medicine, with a minuscule one-off contribution from Ernst. So anyway, in the book, we review a number of instances. We show why these donations are scammed. We review a number of instances of billionaires donating to public institutions, and in many cases, we illustrate the pettiness of their demands. We also point out that giving them naming rights might seem like a harmless concession to their vanity. In fact, naming facilities after billionaires' donors distorts the university's mission in several ways. And we review several instances where billionaire donors have tried more directly to interfere with the governance of the university. But again, I just might note, although this is certainly more egregious cases than this, but I might note that Ernst did with respect to a recent valedictorian speech at the College of Medicine. I don't know if you read about this in the Winnipeg newspapers, but in his valedictorian speech, Jem Newman, a graduating student in the medical school, spent less than 2 minutes of his speech referring to what he called the genocidal war that Israel is waging against the people of Palestine and decrying the widespread destruction in Gaza. And in particular, he noted that medical facilities and healthcare workers were in particular seen to be targeted in Gaza. And anyway, he noted that. Now, whether you think remarks such as that are appropriate in a valedictorian address, there is no question it's entirely consistent with the right of free speech on university campuses. And yet, when Ernst heard of them, he was outraged. He called on the university to denounce Jem Newman's remarks and demanded that the video of the speech that he gave be taken down from the university website. And the university called the remarks divisive and inflammatory and dutifully took down the video. The university president said he would discuss Mr. Rady's concerns with him directly. Again, it's an illustration of the absolutely inappropriate influence that billionaires have on university policy. In the book, we review many other instances, but the broader point is that through their philanthropy, the wealthy are able to illegitimately influence the shape and the priorities of Canadians and their public institutions. The other thing, and this is another point, this is in another chapter, we talk about private foundations. Actually, the charitable tax credit and related tax concessions allow wealthy to divert billions of dollars in government funds to charities of their choosing and appear to be generous, but actually the tax bias in favor of the wealthy even goes beyond that, because most billionaires don't give their donations directly to an operating charity the way that you and I do. Instead, they give them to their own private foundations. And most Canadians are probably unfamiliar with private foundations, but every wealthy Canadian has one. And the way it works is that a wealthy individual establishes a foundation, which they invariably named after themselves, let's say the Asper Foundation, which you might have heard of. Then they make their charitable donations directly to their foundation, and they receive all the tax breaks of having made a charitable deduction toward a charitable organization. So let's say they donate $1 million to their private foundation. Once they claim the related tax concessions, in some cases, if they give $1 million to their private foundation, as little as 200,000 of that might be their own money, and the other 800,000 might be, in effect, the tax that they saved by making a charitable donation. And then when they give it to their foundation, they immediately get all of those tax breaks. And the money they contribute can sit in that foundation under their and their family members' control in perpetuity. And all they have to do is to disperse every year 5% of the value of the assets in the foundation. But very likely the investments they hold in their private foundation increases in value by more than 5% every year. So all they got to do is disperse 5%, and those assets can just stay in there under their control and the control of their family members, as I say, in perpetuity. At present, there's over $100 billion, well over $100 billion of assets warehoused in these private foundations controlled by wealthy Canadians. And again, although we don't know the precise amount, presumably as much as 65% of that, or 70 billion, will have been diverted from government revenues. So that amount of government funds, 65 billion, is sitting idle under the control of Canadians' wealthiest families, and all they got to do is disperse every year 5% of the value of the assets. Again, just to use the Asper Family Foundation example, in 2023, the last year which you have numbers, the total amount of assets in the Asper Foundation was 200 million. And in that year, they paid out only 10 million. They paid 10 million out to actual operating charities. And again, that amount that they paid out might be conditioned on the charity naming a wing or a building or a fellowship or something after the Asper family. Indeed, of course, we get the Asper School of Business. I mean, that would have been an amount probably paid out of their charitable foundation, and they got the business school. And indeed, the Asper name is plastered all over the University of Manitoba and the University of Winnipeg, I noticed. And so private foundations provide billionaires with increased prestige, power, and influence. Moreover, they might hire their family members and relatives and friends as staff of the foundation, pay them a decent salary. Again, the Asper Foundation, which only paid out 10 million in 2023, incurred management administrative expenses of about 3 million. Who knows what they were doing with that? They got 7 full-time employees, one of whom is paid between 300 and 350,000. And it's controlled by 3 members of the Asper family, and they're controlling all that hundreds of millions of government money, again, just in perpetuity. Anyway, and then furthermore on our book, I say I'm running out of time here, I'm just going to be very quickly here. The book, we did a study of the Canadian top 50 largest private foundations, who they gave their grants to. And no surprise, it turned out the charitable institutions that primarily they give it to primarily benefit the rich. They give it to well-endowed universities like the University of Toronto and McGill got a huge amount, presumably which they and their family members attended, hospitals, art museums. Less than 6% of the money came out, went to what might be described as poverty relief. And the third, incidentally, the third largest recipient of funds from the top 50 private foundations was actually a university in Israel. The Israeli Institute of Technology, which received 97 million. And that university is known to have extensive ties to the Israeli Defense Forces. And indeed, in 2023, the Asper Foundation gave large donations to institutions in Israel. So, I mean, let's be clear. I mean, the wealthy have every right to create large stockpiles of their own money and give it to whoever they want, or give it to people or not give it to people, whatever they choose. But that's not what's going on here. What's going on here is money in those stockpiles in private foundation is money for which they would have received major tax concessions, and a large percent of it is public money. It just seems strange to us in a democracy that the wealthy would be given control over so much public money to distribute to charitable causes of their choice, when and if they choose to. So we argue that the tax concessions for private foundations should be repealed, and all existing private foundations should be wound down, and their massive holdings dispersed to active charities, preferably those helping the less fortunate. Anyway, all I'm saying is, we've got a couple chapters on what we call the philanthropy scam. It's good stuff. If I may say so. And stuff is not really new. I mean, it's and then finally, and I'll just take 1 minute to say this. I do have some notes here to provide a lot more, but just one. We finally have another chapter that doesn't deal directly with wealth tax, and we call it "What Billionaires Can Learn from Finland." And the important point of the chapter is billionaires are often saying, no, don't tax us anymore because the government will just waste our money. And furthermore, if you tax us, you know, we won't work so hard or save so much, and we won't have so much economic growth. So we say, well, if that's the case, if governments just waste tax money, and if high taxes cause people to work less and save less and therefore destroy it, then if one looked around the world, one would expect in high tax countries, the social outcomes and the quality of life wouldn't be any better than low tax countries, because the governments would be wasting all that tax money and not using it to increase people's quality of life. And furthermore, the economic outcomes in those high tax countries would be less, because they're collecting so much tax that presumably people aren't working as hard or saving as much as they otherwise would. So what we did is we took all the industrial countries and lined them all up from the lowest tax to the highest tax country, and then compared the low tax countries and the high tax countries. The low tax countries turn all out to be largely the Anglo-American countries. US, Canada, New Zealand, UK, Australia are all low tax countries, relatively low tax countries. On average, they collect about 29% of their GDP, that is the size of their economy. They collect about 29% of it in taxes. In the Nordic countries, Finland, Sweden, Norway, and Denmark, they collect on average 43% of their GDP in taxes. That is, their taxes in those countries are 14 percentage points higher than the Anglo-American countries. The United States is a really low tax country. It's the lowest of them all. And people want us to be like the United States. And then what we do is we take all these social indicators and compare them. It turns out, like, I would challenge you, you go home and think about this. Think of one social indicator that would suggest that a country has a high quality of life. Any indicator you want. Every indicator that we could think of, we tested it, and the high tax countries were far above the low tax countries. That is, the quality of life in those countries is enormously better than in low tax countries. And we went through a whole bunch of them. I'll just mention two. And before I get the hook, but like child poverty, and you're not, like, that's an important indicator of quality of life in a country. How many kids are living in poverty, for goodness sake? In the United States, it's 21% of children live in families below the poverty line. In Canada, which is sort of a medium tax country, it's 10%. In Sweden, it's like 3%. Finland, we're comparing Finland. Could be any one of the Nordic countries, you choose Finland. 3% is just noise. I mean, kids don't live in poverty in that. In terms of gender equality, I wish I could go through these because as an indicator of health, you just look at how long, what the life expectancy is. In the United States, it's 76 years. In Canada, it's 81. You know, we live on average 5 years longer than they do. I mean, it seems to me that's an important indicator of the quality of life. As Krugman said, that one important factor is in the quality of life is not being dead. And we're doing pretty good. And Finland's doing even better. Social solidarity, physical, you name it, environmental, the indicator of your democracy. In a recent study on comparing democratic states across these countries, the low tax countries are always low on it. United States is so low that it's in a category called flawed democracy. They don't even call it democracy anymore. And social happiness, well, I'll just mention happiness. and again, on the scale of happiness, comparing all these countries, the United States ranks 23rd in the world, Canada 15th, Sweden, Finland, Jesus, Finland. Report people in Finland report. I mean, they're the happiest people in the world. They've been like that for 7 years running now. Here's one effect of high taxes: it makes you happy. You know, we should. So make those bastards pay. They'll be happy. They'll be happy. Well, I'm not going to go through this. You can read the book. It's a lovely chapter. Billionaires. Anyway, thank you very much. So nice to meet you.
Absolutely. I see some people at the back. There's seats here. It had been reserved for the Carney cabinet, but it didn't show up. So please come in.
They tried, but we chased them away.
Okay, thanks.
So we will open the floor to questions now. Are there any out there? Oh, yes.
You had mentioned trickle-down economics at the beginning. Have you heard of John Kenneth Galbraith's characterization of it? It's like feeding more oats to the horse in the expectation more will come out the other end of the barrels.
Well, somehow.
But anyway, I was wanting to make reference, you said the billionaires won't be because of the exit tax. The same exit tax applies though when you die. So what's the effect of the deemed disposition on death for the really ultra rich in terms of the taxes that get collected?
Do you want to deal with that or?
Yeah, they do pay. There's a deemed disposition of all your property on death, and you pay tax on all your accrued gains. And there really isn't any way of they do. I was going to say there isn't any way of avoiding it. They do engage in what are called estate freezes, so that they limit how valuable their estate becomes and pass it on to their children through sort of sophisticated estate freezing arrangements. But they're eventually they're taxed. But it's so far away that if you take a present value of it, you know, it's not.
But even with the estate, even with the estate freeze, do they not have to pay capital gains and it's locked at that?
Yes, it is. Whatever they lock it in at, they'll pay the capital gains tax on that when they die. You're exactly right.
And it, can I just add, like, it's true that they do have to pay that capital gains at death, and that's the same thing that they have to pay in terms of the exit tax.
Yeah.
The difference is, when they have to pay the exit tax, they're not dead,
Oh, no, I know.
okay? And so, you know, it's one thing to have to pay a tax when you die. It's another thing to have to pay it when you're alive, and they definitely will not want to do that. And furthermore, we would point out that, like, that's the exit tax, that already exists, okay? But any wealth tax would also have its own wealth tax, or sorry, exit tax. So for instance, you've heard about the wealth tax proposals of Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, senators in the US. They had good wealth taxes and very good additional exit taxes on them. So the exit tax is a really serious thing. You know, you can't use it. For instance, you know about, I think I mentioned about the healthcare workers trying to get a wealth tax in California, which is a great idea, but there's the problem that in California, it's at the state level if they get it, okay? And so what that will mean is that the billionaires could move to another state. It's not that difficult to move to another state. It's very difficult to move to another country. You cannot move to another country. No American can move out of the country and not pay those taxes, pay that exit tax. Same thing in Canada. It's a very real thing. You never hear them talk about it. When you check, whenever you hear all these accountants, you know, these Bay Street types talk, oh no, you can't do that, the rich will leave. They never mention the exit tax. They know about it, because when we talk to them, they will acknowledge it, but they won't ever say it publicly.
Wasn't it before Macartney became prime minister that he had an equity management company, and he sits on the board, and that became quite a controversy in the news. So wouldn't that be an exit tax barrier? You describe it as a barrier to them moving, but you moved it right before you was quite
Yeah, I'm not sure of the arrangements with Brookfield.
Yeah.
Sorry. Anyway, you're absolutely right. I'm just not sure of the arrangements for Brookfield. I think.
I'm going to ask this question mostly because, Linda, you're making me think of the Toronto varsity and somebody that you might remember from those days, who is probably a billionaire, Sherry Bridson.
In fact, believe it or not, I was at Sherry Bridson's wedding.
Well, so was I.
Because Sherry Bridson, who we're referring to, in case you don't know, is the richest woman in Canada. She's of the Thompson family. And we know her, not because we move in those circles, but because she used to be a student radical at U of T.
And walked a picket line at the Peterborough Examiner, owned by her grandfather. But so what I was thinking about is that what the little that I, have been able to read about Sherry is that she's very good about giving away her money and very kind about this kind of stuff. And I was wondering, are there really rich folks in Canada who are on side with this? And does that help at all?
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yes, there's a group, in fact, called Patriotic Millionaires, not billionaires, but millionaires. And it's active in the United States and parts of Europe, and in Canada. And we've been in touch with Claire Trottier, who very active. There are some wealthy people, And there's even a group of young wealthy people that are interested in this, that are concerned about this. And they, like Patriotic Millionaires, keenly supports a wealth tax. And so we make common cause with groups like that. So yes, there are. I'd have to say they tend to be a minority. But yes, that it, you know, as Claire Trottier, we quote her in the book, you know, she points out, you could impose this wealth tax and it just would have no impact on me or my friends at all. Like we pay it, it would do nothing to interfere with our lifestyles one little bit. So, you know, she's in favor of it, and sort of.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but that raises a good point. What would, if you were to implement, what would does that look like for you? What would the steps for implementing the wealth tax look like in an ideal scenario?
You mean politically? Is that what you're saying?
Politically, financially, implementing it as a whole and into society, how do you think that could be pushed through with as many parties on board, I guess?
Well, I mean, one point I would make is that, you know, I think I mentioned this, the support out there is huge. 90%. 88%, almost 90% of Canadians support a wealth tax, okay? And that includes all kinds of conservatives even. It's kind of a no-brainer in some ways. But you have all that support out there, but it's never activated, right? Because at the political level, the dominant political parties certainly have no interest in it at all. The Conservatives, the Liberals, no. We do now have in the NDP new leader, Avi Lewis, a keen supporter of the wealth tax. You know, Mark Carney's honeymoon is not going to last forever. And, you know, we've got Avi Lewis out there as an extremely articulate, highly articulate spokesperson for the idea, along with other good ideas. I think, especially as I mentioned, that backlash that's coming in the US, I think you could see momentum behind, you know, and also we've been trying to get labor groups involved and had some interest from them, because, you know, if you could get labor, what we need is some organization. Like, how do we get those 90% of people activated?
There is a movement sort of around the world in favor of a wealth tax. And we could go through what's happening in other countries and what the United Nations is doing and the G20 and so on. But there is quite a strong movement around the world now in favor of a wealth tax. You don't hear about it because the billionaires own all the newspapers. And the billionaires own all, you know, run all the powerful think tanks and so on, other than the wonderful CCPA. But so, and like the wealth tax we're proposing on people earning over 25 with assets of over 25 million, that's the top 0.1% of Canadians. It's 19,500 people. And so if a government were to enact a wealth tax, it would be quite easy for them to audit those people fairly rigorously to make sure that they weren't evading or avoiding it.
Yeah. So, yeah, no, boy.
In terms of getting 90% of the people activated, I mean, I think we need to have the votes count. You know, like, we need fair voting, we need a voting system.
Yeah.
I mean, right now, 52% of the votes are are really garbage doesn't count for anything.
Yeah. That's
We
a nice
need
point.
representation of what the
Yeah.
people actually want.
Yeah, that's a nice point.
Hi. I guess, I mean, my worry here for all of this, I'm not saying I'm on the side of the billionaires, that's not what I'm trying to say at all. My worry is that, or maybe you've done more research on this than I have, does money drive people insane
Yes.
at a certain level? Because just, it was yesterday or the day before, I read it I think it was The Guardian, that a New York billionaire said that taxing the rich, that phrase, taxing the rich,
Yeah.
was as bad as any racial slur.
Yeah.
And I don't understand that disconnect and how this person would say this
Yeah.
and think that this somehow helps their cause.
No,
So what is it that it's just this constant grabbing for more and more and more and not enough, there can't be enough, even though there's no way they can spend it.
yeah. Yeah, no, if you become very rich, you become delusional. There's no, but just listening to Elon Musk, for goodness sakes, I mean, he's insane. And indeed, we cite them in the book. There's some good psychological studies of the effect of getting wealthy on your attitudes. And how it makes you less empathetic and a whole range of things. And you just lose touch with other people. Like you're no longer surrounded, you never come in contact with other people. And it does weird things, obviously, to your state of mind. And
I think, like, you know, in the US, they have this thing, the giving pledge, and Warren Buffett and Bill Gates tried to get billionaires to give away half their fortunes. Now, we have all kinds of criticism of that because it's that philanthropy scam. When they give money to their, give away, it just goes to their private foundations, not really a giveaway at all. But my point is that at least this sentiment sounded nice, right? Well, I read the other day, who was it? Lauren Sanchez, Bezos's new wife, who said something about, well, it's just outrageous, this notion that billionaires should give away things, like people should be supporting us more. Like she was going on about it's just ridiculous that billionaires, like, we contribute in so many ways. Like she had no conception at all of any kind of social responsibility or anything. It's partly that this is, the public debate, and this comes back to the question of the media controlling things, that the think tanks, apart from the CCPA and the few like that. There's this whole thing that's generated, this anti-tax mania, right? And this so-called celebration of wealth creation. I mean, we go in the book, tell the story of, how we take individual billionaires and describe their story and show how little was something of merit or contribution to society, much of it inherited, otherwise due to monopoly control, or they get control of intellectual property. There's just a million ways that they're able to, the system is rigged, in other words. And yet they have this enormous wealth. And, we have this culture where that is celebrated. They're called wealth creators. And there's just so little serious discussion about how wrong that is, and how much contribution actually comes from the public, and if you look at, let's say the computer revolution, that has made so many people, so many tech billionaires so wealthy? Well, these guys didn't invent the computer. The computer was invented through scientific discoveries all through history. And then the incredible contributions that governments made after the Second World War to the development of the computer. And yet then the billionaires come along and just seize all that value. We need to start recapturing that value to society, because they didn't create that wealth on their own. They created it because of all these historical inventions and all that societies contributed financially to the research that led to the computer and other inventions. So, but we've developed this notion that one person can seize all that value and that that's somehow legitimate. It's, you know, it's crazy.
And we are just past the top of the hour, but we do have time for one more question.
Thank you. So, as you said, it's 19,500 people in this 0.1%, is that?
Yeah, 0.1%, 0.1.
Why wouldn't somebody like Carney, who's a very shrewd, smart man, not realize that this is a simple sell to, the simple concept of 25 million, and then you start paying it 1% and more, and they can raise 40 billion.
Right.
What's he got to lose by doing it before Abby Lewis tells him to?
What, sorry, what's who got to lose?
Carney.
Yeah. Because 90% will vote.
Well, you know, it's such an interesting question and such a valid point. Why is it that 90% of the public does support this, and why does it never get translated into action? Because, again, the role of the think tanks and the role of the media in convincing the public, well, you know, they may in principle like the idea, but sort of convince them, oh no, the rich will leave or whatever. They simply, the wealthy interests simply dominate the debate in getting those ideas out there. I mean, one of the perfect examples of the power of the wealthy is their ownership of the media. I mean, imagine if the media in this country were owned by labor unions. Don't you think we'd get a different public debate? You know, of course. But the fact that it's all owned by very wealthy people, somehow that's considered neutral or doesn't matter. Of course, the biggest newspaper chain in the country now is Post Media. It's actually owned by a US hedge fund with close ties to Donald Trump. Shouldn't that be a problem? That is a problem. But that's why you can have people have these gut feelings. Yeah, the system's unfair. Of course, the rich should pay more tax, but then it gets translated through the whole public shaping of ideas. And, you know, the political parties, well, certainly you won't get that from the Conservatives, but you also won't get it from, you certainly won't get it from Carney, it seems. Don't forget the Trudeau government. The Trudeau government actually brought in that change to the capital gains tax. They were going to make it so that rich people would pay more through capital gains taxes. And, you know, the media, the public, the think tanks, everything put the kibosh on that. There was stories about how, you know, some high income doctor was going to have to give up his cottage or so. It's such a tearjerker, you know, and somehow they managed to kill that perfectly reasonable move that the Trudeau government made. So our whole point is we have to somehow get beyond that. As long as a tax impacts ordinary people, or, you know, middle and upper middle class people, it's gonna be very difficult to get it through. But if we isolate, because, you know, then the rich sort of blend in with the rest of us. And then we can't sort of see them, but if we can get a tax that just goes after the very rich, then it's, they don't generate a lot of sympathy among the public. If you can isolate them and just put a tax on them, see, I think a campaign that was very specific and very focused on just a wealth tax aimed at this tiny group of people, it's not gonna tax you, it's not gonna touch you if you have under 25 million. People are gonna feel that's a pretty good idea, especially when they discover there's a exit tax so the rich can't just skedaddle like we always hear they're going to. So it's tough to get that through. The Carney government, the Conservatives, you're not gonna get them on side. But I think, well, you might get them on, you might get Carney to move if there was enough political pressure coming at them. But it's gotta come through making people aware of just how extreme the situation is and how solvable it would be in that one tax.
Thank you both so much. Do you have any closing comments you might like to make, or?
Just a pleasure to be here. I think it's a great audience, that's for sure, great crowd.
Yes, thank you all so very much. We will be moving along to the signing portion of the evening now, so we will be relocating Neil and Linda from one set of chairs to another set of chairs. Please do feel free to come up and get a book signed before you pay for it, although we do humbly ask that you pay for the book before you physically leave this event. We're so very grateful to all of the CCPA for helping to co-present this event and for all the incredibly vital work they do. So thank you to Molly and the rest of the crew there. Huge thanks to Dundurn Press for printing this book in the first place and getting this message out. And of course, also to all of you for joining us here, sharing your questions and feedback. One quick note before we get started is that when we opened our event stock for the night, we did notice that we have an entire book where some pages are rearranged and some pages are missing. So we are down to a limited number of stock right now. We will be ordering in some right away, but we figured you would want to read a book that you can actually read from page 1 to page 200. So please do avail yourself of the books here, and a lot more coming in right away. Please give a very warm thanks to Neil Brooks.